Гостин во телевизија 24, Дейвид Гир, амбасадор на Европската унија во Скопје. Господин амбасадор, добро дојдовте во телевизија 24.
Thank you, Душица. Nice to be here.
Ви благодарам што прифативте поканата. За жал, онаа тема со која што го почнуваме денешниот разговор не е добра, а се случи тоа што светот се плашеше. Русија ја нападна Украина, утринава влегоа руските сили во Украина по едно драматично обраќање, би кажала, на рускиот претседател Владимир Путин. Како се случи, како светот дозволи да се случи војна во дел на Европа во 21-виот век?
Thank you. Well, I mean, indeed, you're quite right. It's a very dark day, and many people are asking how we have come here, despite the very best efforts of many, including diplomatic efforts by leaders from the European Union, President Macron, Chancellor Scholz, to try and prevent the situation that we find ourselves in now, as well as allies, of course. The leadership of the European Union has been very clear and very united concerning this unprovoked and unjustified military aggression by Russia against Ukraine, which is unlawful under international law and which undermines European security and stability. Even yesterday and the day before, when we were talking about the recognition by Russia of the part of the oblasts of Luhansk and Donetsk, even then the European Union put in place a range of biting sanctions to deter further actions. 371 members of the Duma were sanctioned. 27 individuals and entities which are undermining the territorial integrity of Ukraine were sanctions. Restrictions on Russia's ability to raise money in European finance markets. Restrictions on trade with these entities, Luhansk and Donetsk. And we also saw, of course, the decision by the German government to halt Nord Stream 2. Well, of course, now the situation has deteriorated further. There is a meeting of the European Council today. That means the leaders of the European Union, the member states, are meeting today in Brussels. And no doubt, as has been indicated, further sanctions will be put in place to deter Russia from taking further action, to try and persuade it to pull back and end this aggression.
Какви санкции може да се очекуваат?
I mean, I can't speculate on that because the leaders are now meeting to discuss that. But clearly, these sanctions will have teeth and will be even more significant than the measures taken to date, as has already been indicated by the leaders.
Во своето обраќање, рускиот претседател кажа дека ова е последица од обидите Украина да стане членка на НАТО и од недавањето безбедносни гаранции за Москва, но она што е како клучна порака упатена до Европа и до НАТО и до Америка е дека бара никој да не се меша, бидејќи кажа дека последиците ќе бидат невидени. Веќе има извештаи дека има жртви во овој конфликт помеѓу Русија и Украина, односно нападот на Русија кон Украина. Веќе, како што кажавте, веќе имаше еден пакет на санкции, тоа не го спречи Путин да нападне Украина. Што доколку и овој пат не се премисли со повие радикални санкции, бидејќи впечатокот е дека Украина засега оставена сама на себе во однос на воената сила.
I think the leaders on the European side have made it clear that the question of the future of Ukraine is for Ukraine to determine. It's a sovereign state and its sovereignty and territorial integrity needs to be respected. As regards sanctions, sanctions operate on the basis of increasing pressure depending on the situation and the behavior that you're trying to change. So what we can expect to see is further pressure from the European Union and from international partners, the United States, the United Kingdom and other partners to make clear to Russia the cost of this aggression.
Над 100 авиони се во борбена готовност, меѓутоа дека НАТО повторува нема да испраќа војници во Украина, но го засилува присуството на истокот. Дали се уште тоа е таа европска НАТО позиција дека нема да се одговори со воена инвазија на Русија?
Well, I can't speak for NATO, but you yourself have spoken for NATO and explained what the position is. The European Union, obviously, its approach is one of increasing pressure via sanctions and diplomatic pressure, and calling to international community to support that. And those efforts will continue, and that's why the leaders of the European Union are meeting in Brussels today, and the pressure will continue to end this aggression by Russia.
Имаше диалог, имаше средби, имаше санкции и сепак имаме војна. Дали ова може да прирасне во трета светска војна? Сега ве прашувам повеќе како геополитичко размислување.
No, I'm not going to speculate where this goes. I mean, clearly the Union and NATO have been very clear that the response is an economic response via the imposition of increasing sanctions to make clear what the consequences are of this aggression. And that's the road that we're down, to try and persuade Russia that the cost of this will be enormous.
Само уште едно прашање на темава. Имавте вие, мислам дека минатата недела состанок со амбасадорката на Украина во Македонија. Денеска таа упати исто така апел преку видео обраќање дека на Украина и треба помош и дека се соочува со буквална катастрофа. Дали планирате денеска, утре, деновиве повторна средба со амбасадорката на Украина и дали можеби на вашата агенда ќе се најде и амбасадорот на Русија во Македонија, зборувам?
We met the Ukrainian ambassador together with the member states in order to show our solidarity earlier in this week with Ukraine. That was the message that we wished to pass. Of course, the political discussions take place between Brussels and Kiev regularly at the higher level, and those will continue. That's the focus of the main political discussion and support. But there is considerable support coming. Also, the European Commission announced earlier this week a very, very substantial package of additional financial assistance to the Ukrainian economy to help stabilize the situation. So you are seeing the European using all the different tools that it has at its disposal, the economic tools, to support Ukraine in this very difficult situation, as well as the diplomatic and political tools.
Рускиот амбасадор не ви е на агенда?
I'm not planning to meet the Russian ambassador at the moment.
Освен оваа светска тема, втората најважна работа во Македонија е членството во Европската унија и тој фамозен старт на преговори за членство кој што се одложува со години. Бугарскиот спор е активен, комисијата за историски прашања денеска и утре се среќава. Меѓутоа, она што е како последна порака што директно влијае Македонија, Софија, Брисел, трилатералата, е последното барање и инсистирање на Софија евентуалниот договор помеѓу Македонија и Бугарија да стане дел од преговарачката рамка. Колку е тоа прифатливо за Европската унија билатералниот спор да влезе во Европската унија, односно во преговарачката рамка?
So, let's go back to where we are. As you know, our position, we very much want to see the opening of negotiations as soon as possible. After all, North Macedonia has satisfied the conditions for the opening of negotiations. That's why in July 2020, the European Commission put on the table what we call a negotiating framework, a draft negotiating framework. That's a kind of terms of reference for the accession negotiations themselves. In order to move forward, that negotiating framework has to be agreed by the 27 member states unanimously. So far, we've not been able to get there. I'm not going to go in, as you can imagine, the details of what's in the negotiating framework or what the EU may or may not do concerning the bilateral discussions. What I would like to do is take the opportunity to commend the efforts of Skopje and Sofia to give a new dynamism to the relationship with the aim of reaching a mutually acceptable agreement on the outstanding bilateral issues, as well as giving impetus to the good neighbourly relations and the cooperation across many different sectors in many different areas. That's a positive development which we very much support.
Така, меѓутоа, она што е клучен проблем како впечаток во Македонија во овој спор е дека секогаш позицијата на Европската унија била дека не сака билатералните спорови да останат надвор од неа. Така беше во однос на македонско-грчкиот спор, така беше спорот помеѓу Словенија и Хрватска. Зошто во овој спор би било поинаку? Ако се прифати инсистирањето на Бугарија да стане евентуалниот договор дел од преговарачката рамка, тоа по автоматизам влегува, станува дел од преговарачкиот процес.
As I say, I'm not going to go into the negotiating framework itself, whether elements are in it or outside of it, because that's for the member states to determine, and no decision has been taken on that. So anything I say would be pure speculation. But we are in a situation where we have a decision by at the highest level to open negotiations, but we have difficulties because of the way in which the voting happens within the Council, 27 member states. We have difficulties in opening up, in reaching agreement among the member states on the negotiating framework, the terms of reference for accession themselves. One member state, Bulgaria, as you know, is not happy to move forward for that for the moment. Separately, there are bilateral issues between Sofia and Skopje, which need to be resolved. So it's a complicated situation, but I don't think the position of the European Union has changed in any way, in the sense that the accession process, we want to see the accession process moving forward, but until this issue of a negotiating framework is resolved, there is agreement in the Council, that step can't yet be crossed. So what do? We need to renew efforts among member states to try and resolve that issue and encourage the bilateral discussions that are taking place here at the moment, in which I've just spoken very positively about.
Зошто Европската унија стои на страна од овие преговори и од овој проблем? Таков е впечатокот во Македонија, дека буквално Европската унија по се што направи Македонија, вклучително и тој тежок и болен компромис во однос на името, дека ЕУ повторно ја остава сама Македонија.
I mean, I think, just to be clear, first of all, it's not as if the EU has just sat back. You've seen the activities, the energy that's been put in by the presidency of the Council, so in other words, Germany, first of all. Then Portugal, they put on the table a proposal to try and bring elements together to find a solution. We saw Slovenia, and we now see France as presidency of the Council. So each of those have been involved. And of course, you've also seen the efforts by the leadership in the European Union to try and resolve this issue broadly and move it forward. It's not the same thing as getting involved in the details of the bilateral discussions between the countries concerned, between North Macedonia and Bulgaria. It's about trying to move forward the whole process in the interests of everyone. And you've also seen the statements that were made by the European Commission at the time that they issued the country report about the importance of moving forward, also as a matter of credibility for the Union itself. So the Union is very much engaged, but that's not the same thing as saying that they're going to get involved into the bilateral nitty-gritty between the countries. It doesn't do that.
Колку барањата на Бугарија се во склоп со европските вредности, се тоа што толку Унијата го пропагира како клучна идеја на Европската унија. Предпоставувам дека сте ја виделе декларацијата која што ја изгласа Бугарското собрание во 2019-тата.
Yeah, of course, I've seen the declaration. I've seen the declaration here as well. So we've had a look, followed closely developments. But as I say, I'm not going to go into commenting on the different positions of these two countries of North Macedonia and Bulgaria. What we want to see is movement forwards, and that's why we're commending the efforts already that we've seen recently and the structures, the working groups, etc., which have been put in place to try and advance on this issue.
Да, меѓутоа клучните политичките прашања остануваат на маста. Од Софија пораката е дека декларацијата од 2019-тата е се уште на сила и мораме да се согласиме дека премногу е различна од македонската резолуција. Бидејќи Софија директно го спорува постоењето на македонскиот јазик, на македонската нација, на самоопределувањето, на историјата и така натаму. Нешто што по автоматизам е идентитет на секој народ, нешто што по автоматизам е европска вредност.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to talk about the identity of this country or the language or other things like that. That's representing the European Union. That's not my responsibility. What we want to see and what is encouraging is that you see a new impetus between the two sides to try and reach a mutually acceptable agreement. That's important, mutually acceptable agreement, which would allow for the opening of negotiations, which would also, of course, enhance good neighbourly relations between the two countries, deepening cooperation in many areas, in trade, in energy, in environment, culture. That's a bit what some of these working groups are about. So that's where we are, and we very much encourage those efforts.
Повторно враќам на она што е тема за денот, додека светот, демократскиот свет, ја осудува апсолутно воената агресија на Русија и прекршувањето на меѓународното право, она што е на микро состојба во Македонија, ние го имаме моментот кога Бугарија не признава 16 пресуди на Судот за човекови права во Страсбур, ниту пак укажување на парламентарното собрание и на Советот на Европа за регистрација на Сдруженијата на македонци во Бугарија. Има ли двојни аршини Европа, господина Гер?
No, I don't think so at all. I think the European Union, it's clear it's a union founded on values, respect for fundamental principles and human rights, and that appears throughout the efforts that we make to promote human rights, good governance, rule of law, including in this country. And that's an element, and I think people understand that, that's a very key element to the character of the European Union.
Колку, за крај, колку оној многу битен договор, наречен зелен договор за спасување на планетата, кој што сега во овој момент не изгледа толку битен со се она што се случува светот и Европа, меѓутоа е многу клучен во однос на иднината и опстанокот на животот на оваа планета. Докаде тој беше историски, колку можеме да сметаме на зелена Европа.
I couldn't agree with you more. This is really a generational challenge for us. This is the challenge of our generation. What the European Green Deal is about, it's trying to address three enormous challenges. The first, of course, is climate change brought about by human activity, including carbon emissions in particular. Second is the collapse in many parts of the world of biodiversity, which has huge impacts. And thirdly is the environmental degradation, which results from the way in which we use resources and consume resources in a way a bit our throwaway society. So the European Green Deal is aiming to reverse that, while at the same time it's putting forward a model for growth which is sustainable. And it covers a number of different activities. Of course, there is a diplomatic activity at the highest level to try and make sure that the international community works together to achieve the same goals. In our case, for example, on climate change, carbon neutrality by 2050. That's why the discussions were so important in Glasgow, and that's why further efforts are needed to advance on that. But there are other elements. We see regularly now coming out of Brussels policies or actions or activities which are designed to put into practice ways in which we can ensure that these goals are met, whether that's about plastics, whether that's about energy efficiency, energy, renewables. It covers pretty much every area of our activities. And then, of course, there is also very significant financial support. So underpinning the European Green Deal, we aim to have something in the region of about €1 trillion to support it, half of which comes from the EU budget and from the European emissions trading scheme, but half which would be public-private finance. This is designed to really aid this transition. Now, here in the Western Balkans, this country and the other countries have signed up to the green agenda for the Western Balkans. This is very much reflects the same principles, the same goals as the Green Deal itself. And so what we need to see here, and where we're working with the authorities, is action on all the key areas. Efforts to combat climate change, so this is about the energy transition. We know gas as a temporary transitional fuel, but also renewables in particular. It's also about smart transport, those kind of things. It's about tackling the biodiversity issue. It's about dealing with pollution. We all know about pollution here, pollution of the air. Any city, you will experience it. But there's also pollution of water, pollution of the soil. As you said, these are the things that give life. And so this needs to be tackled. But also food production and agriculture. This is another key area, as well as what we call the circular economy, making sure that we make maximum use of the goods and resources that we have, rather than having this throwaway society. We're providing lots of practical support in the country now, helping buildings to improve their energy efficiency, working on renewables, looking at improved transport, and we'll continue to do so. This is really, as I think we both agree, this is really the challenge of our generation.
Господине Гири, јас ви благодарам за гостувањето во телевизија 24.